Here again is the indictment on which the jury was to make its verdict. It charges that Alger Hiss swore falsely when he told the grand jury under oath that he never turned over to Whittaker Chambers without authorization any confidential State Department documents or copies of such documents, and that he did not see Chambers after January 1, 1937. The enormous Prosecutor Murphy's opening address to the jury lasted only 23 minutes and was, according to Time magazine, as undramatic as if he were reading a director's report. Here are some excerpts with, as often in the case in my presentations to you, some cuts and rephrasings to make things go more smoothly. If Your Honor please, ladies and gentlemen, the ultimate issue you have to decide is whether Alger Hiss lied, and lied deliberately, concerning two subjects. How are we going to prove that? Lying, as we know, is a sort of mental process. It goes on underneath the bone and the hair. You have to prove it by other means. It's not like taking a picture. Let us suppose that a child of yours came home and said that he or she was at school on Tuesday, and you had some slight doubt about that and decided to investigate. So you went to the school and found that your child was marked absent the whole day in question. And then if you pressed it a little further, you found that your brother saw your child in the movie theater that day. I dare say you'd come to the conclusion that your child was lying. That is what we are going to do here. We're going to put Mr. Chambers on the stand, and he is going to tell you in the most explicit fashion how, over a period of time from 1937 and part of 1938, this defendant, violating his sworn duty, handed over secret and confidential documents to him, Chambers, a communist, when obviously he did not have any right to them at all. He handed them over in wholesale fashion. The documents were all secret. In fact, one of them is still secret to such an extent that we're going to have the judge not permit you to see it. We're going to have State Department men tell you that the documents Chambers produced are identical to documents on file in the State Department, highly confidential. I want you to examine Chambers. I want you to listen attentively, watch his conduct on the stand, watch the color of his face, watch the way his features move, because if you don't believe Chambers, then we have no case under the federal perjury rule. So watch Mr. Chambers. Examine what motive he would have to lie. And I dare say you will be as convinced as I am that he is telling the truth and that what Mr. Hiss told the grand jury were lies. Thank you. Lloyd Paul Stryker for the defense, who was a short, barrel-chested man with short hair, looked like a Roman senator, gave the opening address for the defense, speaking for an hour without notes. Here are some highlights. Mr. Foreman and ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we are glad to be here. The days of the Klieg lights and the television and all the paraphernalia, the propaganda that surrounded the beginning of this story are over. We are here in a dignified and calm and quiet and fair court of justice. Mr. Murphy told you that if you do not believe Mr. Chambers, the government has no case. I think that is a fair statement of the case. You will want to evaluate Mr. Chambers and Mr. Hiss, the accused, just as if Mr. Murphy said your child was accused of lying, you would want to evaluate both the accuser and your beloved child. Who is the accused? What is he? What is his life? What has he done? Alger Hiss was born in Maryland and educated in the Baltimore schools, finally going to Johns Hopkins University, one of the distinguished seats of learning in our country. Alger Hiss went through Johns Hopkins with honor, with credit, with distinction, with high honors, winning the confidence and favorable opinion of all who knew him at that early period in his life. From Johns Hopkins, he went up to the Harvard Law School, one of the very great seats of learning in our country. His scholarship was such and his conduct was such that he was chosen as a member of the board of the Harvard Law Review. there was each year a post given to a young man not only of signal scholarship, but of character. And that great post was the post of secretary to the great Oliver Wendell Holmes. Of some 500 or 600, Alger Hiss was chosen for that post. And in it he was trusted with secrets, the revelation of which might bring infinite disaster to various people or to the Supreme Court itself. Well, Alger Hiss was good enough for Oliver Wendell Holmes, and of the many characters, the character witnesses I shall call, if the case gets that far, I shall summon with all due reverence the shade of that great member of the Supreme Court. Alger Hiss then received the trust and confidence of fine lawyers in Boston and New York, and then the New Deal, and an important investigation of the United States Senate picked him as counsel when he had just turned 30. And then the office of Solicitor General of the United States. He was weighed in all these crucibles and never found wanting in the slightest possible particular or degree. He was trusted so much that his eye came under the gaze of the President of the United States. As people live, so they are. I mean, a fraud could get by for 6 months, maybe a year, but here the years roll on. Yalta with President Roosevelt, the great conference in San Francisco, the UN Charter, which may someday be enshrined like our Constitution. Who was the man chosen to take it to the President of the United States? Why, it was Alger Hiss. Many years ago, a great philanthropist in this city, Andrew Carnegie, set up a trust fund to found the Endowment for International Peace. And the first president chosen for that great, splendid philanthropy was one of the greatest statesmen we've had in a century, Elihu Root. When he died, a great gentleman of this city, a president of a great university, Nicholas Murray Butler, was chosen as the second president. And when there was a need of choosing a third president, those are not stupid men, those trustees. They looked around the United States to get the best man they could in America, the most trustworthy man they could find in America. And whom did they select? Alger Hiss. I will take Alger Hiss by the hand, and I will lead him before you from the date of his birth unto this very hour even. And yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for there is neither blot nor blemish on him. So much, ladies and gentlemen, for the accused. Now, who was the accuser? A man who now styles himself as J. Whittaker Chambers. He began changing his names early. He began using an alias even before he joined the Communist Party. Even as a teenager, he was a furtive, secretive, deceptive man. At an age when Alger Hiss was giving the best example I can think of being a fine citizen, this man Chambers chose to become a member of the Communist Party. He chose to enter into a conspiracy to overthrow the government of the United States by any means. An organization that believed that wrong was right, that anything that would aid and abet the overthrow of this dear land of ours was a thing the conspirators were for. He belonged to an organization that believed it right to commit any crime, and here I see you will be interested, especially lying. Lying. It is one of the main tenets of this group of conspirators with which this man Chambers, alias Adams, alias Crosley, alias Cantwell, alias a great many other things, chose to associate himself. He was a member of this filthy, nefarious, low-down conspiracy for 12 long years. 12 long years our accuser was a voluntary conspirator against the land that I love and you love. Every crust of bread that went down his throat for those 12 years was given to him by his communist confederates. He had written a filthy, despicable play about Jesus Christ when he was at Columbia. He was dismissed. And how did he get back in? By lying. A communist, a conspirator and thug, destitute of honor, destitute of credit for 12 long years. When Chambers accused him in public before Puac, did Mr. Hiss sulk? No, he went in and denied the charge. And he said to Chambers, "Say these things where I can sue you." Chambers made the statements. Nothing about espionage. That was a later invention. So Alger Hiss sues, the good old-fashioned American thing for an American to do. Of course, no man who was guilty would dare bring an action for libel. Chambers then, with a libel suit tumbling around his head for the first time, comes forward with his statement about spying. How many earlier opportunities had he had to tell about this story before? Under oath, 16 times he denied espionage. Alger Hiss testified before the grand jury and never refused to testify on constitutional grounds. Not Alger Hiss. He brought the papers Chambers produced to the attention of the authorities. His lawyer, Ed McLean, found the typewriter, and Alger Hiss said, "I will suppress nothing." I ask you again, is that the conduct of a guilty man? When Mr. Hiss met Mr. Chambers, he found him a glib and interesting talker, something out of Jack London. Mr. Chambers is all that. You will hear him. He's a very able man. He is a writer, a dramatic writer. Alger Hiss was interested in what he thought was another Jack London. No one was there to warn him about Whittaker Chambers, as I now warn you. You know, in the warm southern countries where they still have leprosy, sometimes in the streets, you will hear a voice crying down the street, "Unclean, unclean," at the approach of a leper. Ladies and gentlemen, I say to you, unclean, unclean, at the approach of the moral leper, Chambers. They don't make them like Lloyd Paul Stryker anymore.